My name is Diane Whitfield. I am 52 years old, and my family has spent 3 decades mistaking my silence for surrender. That night, in a private dining room at a vineyard in Napa, my husband stood up with a glass of champagne in his hand and thanked the woman sitting 2 seats away from me for, quote, finally understanding him. I did not drop my fork. I did not gasp. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and let him finish his speech. Welcome back to Cherry Revenge Tales. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. 6 months earlier, at my mother-in-law's 75th birthday, in a dining room that smelled like candle wax and old money, my husband's family had gathered around a table I'd hosted 11 Thanksgivings on. My sister-in-law, Colette, tapped her wine glass and announced that she and her husband had just closed on a second home in Carmel. Everyone clapped. Then she turned to me, smiling with just her mouth. And Diane still does the bookkeeping. Not everyone is built for the spotlight, dear, she said. Some of us just weren't. I smiled and passed the potatoes. What none of them knew, what I had never once mentioned in 26 years of marriage, was that I hadn't done bookkeeping in over a decade. I was the co-founder and majority owner of the firm's holding company. Richard ran the office. I ran the money. That had been our arrangement since the beginning, back when he was a junior architect with more ambition than capital, and I was the one who'd remortgaged my late father's house to fund our first contract. I let them believe what let them sleep better. That birthday dinner wasn't unusual. It was simply the clearest example of a pattern I'd lived inside for 26 years. Richard's family had a particular gift for it, the compliment that wasn't one, the concern that was really contempt wearing a cardigan. His father, before he passed, used to call me practical, the way you'd describe a good pair of work boots. Useful, sturdy. Not the kind of thing you show off at a party. I used to mind. Somewhere around year 15, I stopped minding and started paying attention instead. There's a strange kind of power in being underestimated by people who love the sound of their own importance. The demands started 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner. Richard came into my office at home, the one Eleanor liked to call Diane's little corner, and closed the door behind him. I need you to sign off on releasing $40,000 from the reserve account, he said. For Colette and Marcus. They're short on the Carmel place. That reserve account is for payroll contingencies, Richard, not your sister's second vacation home. It's family, Diane. His voice had that practiced patience he used on difficult clients. No. You don't say no to me in my own house. It's our house, I said, and it's my signature on that account, not yours. He left without another word, but he came back the next evening with a different approach. Softer, wounded, the version of Richard he used when confrontation hadn't worked. He sat on the edge of the bed while I read, and he talked about how tired he was, how much pressure he carried, keeping the firm's reputation intact. How a man in his position couldn't afford to look weak in front of his own family. He didn't like that answer any better than the first one. 2 days later, Eleanor called. She didn't ask about my health or the weather. She asked, in a voice syrup-sweet and razor-edged, whether I understood what loyalty meant in this family. Richard built that firm, she said. You just helped. It would be a shame if people started asking what, exactly, you contribute. I told her I hoped she had a lovely week and hung up. They thought silence meant I hadn't noticed. They thought composure meant I hadn't counted. I had counted everything. Every transfer Richard had quietly authorized to a numbered account, linked to his assistant, Priya, over the past 9 months. Every hotel charge in Sacramento on nights he'd told me he was in client meetings in San Jose. I said nothing about any of it, not one word. The night before the anniversary dinner, Richard sat across from me at the kitchen island, aggressively casual, swirling his scotch. You've been quiet lately, he said. I've been thinking, I said. About? 26 years. He smiled, misreading me completely, the way he always did. To 26 more. On his desk was a folder with Richard's transfers, his hotel records, and a private investigator's report with dates, times, and photographs. Arthur had looked at me over his glasses and said, You understand, once we file, there's no taking it back. I told him I understood perfectly. I asked Arthur one more question before I left his office that day. I asked him what happened to women like me, women who'd spent decades being told they were the help disguised as a wife. He closed the folder, looked at me for a long moment, and said, "In my experience, Mrs. Whitfield, they're usually the only ones in the room who kept receipts." I thought about that the whole drive home. But the morning of the anniversary dinner, I sat at my vanity and clipped a thin silver watch onto my left wrist. Not my usual gold one, but a new one, a gift I'd bought myself. I pressed the side button twice, felt the faint double pulse against my skin that told me it had started recording, and set my expression back to something soft and unbothered before Richard walked in. My skin was fair, weathered gently at the eyes from 3 decades of squinting into California sun, the kind of face people call handsome instead of pretty, once you cross 50, and I had made peace with that a long time ago. I am not a small woman, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of build that carried 2 children and 40 years of standing my ground. That night I wore a deep emerald green silk dress, fitted through the waist, with long sleeves and a modest neckline and a single strand of my grandmother's pearls. The valet took our car at 6:55 p.m. The private room at the vineyard glowed gold with candlelight, string lights woven through the exposed beams, a long table set with white linen, and clusters of white ranunculus down the center. Richard had chosen the venue himself, insisted on this particular room, because, he'd said, it photographed beautifully. I remember thinking as I took my seat that he had never once asked what I wanted for our anniversary. Not that year, not most years. Richard stood at the head of the table at 7:40 p.m., champagne in hand, and thanked his parents, his sister, his children, and then, almost as an afterthought, almost proud of himself for the audacity, he turned toward the woman 2 seats down. "And I want to thank Priya," he said, raising his glass toward her, "for finally understanding what I need, for being someone who actually sees me." The table went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone senses a line has been crossed, but no one wants to be the first to react. Eleanor's fork paused mid-air. I let him sit back down, flushed with champagne and self-satisfaction, before I set my own glass on the table and stood. "Since we're sharing tonight," I said, my voice even, carrying "I have an announcement too." Richard smiled, expecting a toast back. "Diane, you don't have to." "I filed for divorce on Tuesday," I said, "and I've notified the firm's board that effective this morning, I've exercised my majority shareholder rights to remove you as managing partner, pending the outcome of an internal financial review. I have since 1999. You run the office. I've always run the money. I simply never saw a reason to correct you." "That's insane. That account is under my—" "Diane, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I asked. "Because I have 9 months of transfers to an account under Priya's name. I have hotel receipts from the DoubleTree in Sacramento, on nights you told me you were in San Jose, and as of 8 p.m. tonight, so does my attorney, at 8:06 exactly as Arthur Kessler had told me he would." A man in a plain gray suit walked into the private dining room and asked quietly, "For Richard Whitfield." "Mr. Whitfield, I'm with Kessler and Ames," he said, flat and unbothered, like he did this every evening of his life. "I need a moment of your time regarding a subpoena related to Whitfield Holdings' financial records." "This is a private event," Eleanor snapped. "You can't just—" "I have proper service authorization, ma'am." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This won't take long." Colette's husband, Marcus, who had said nothing all evening, suddenly found his voice. "Wait." I said, "Shut up, oh my God," Colette whispered, hand over her mouth. "You used our name on paperwork you weren't authorized to sign, didn't you?" "Didn't you, Richard?" Priya, 2 seats down, had gone very still, her champagne untouched, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth like she could disappear into the linen. She was younger than my daughter. I found, in that moment, that I didn't hate her at all. I only felt the particular sadness of watching someone walk willingly into a house that was already on fire. He was staring at me instead, and for the first time in 26 years, I watched real fear move across my husband's face. Eleanor turned to me, her composure cracking for the first time in 26 years. "You planned this," she said. "You sat there and let him humiliate himself in front of everyone." Someone has to keep the lights on, I said, while the real work happens. I picked up my clutch, nodded once to the man in gray, and walked out of that private room at 8:11 p.m., leaving my husband arguing with a process server, his sister screaming at him about fraud, and his mother sitting alone at the head of a table that was never really hers to preside over. Outside, the valet brought my car around without me having to ask. The night air smelled like crushed grapes and dust, and somewhere behind me, through the closed doors, I could still hear Colette's voice rising, sharp and panicked, demanding to know how much of her own life had been built on her brother's lies. I didn't go back inside to find out. I had spent 26 years cleaning up rooms after everyone else made a mess of them. That night, I let the mess belong to the people who made it. If you've ever been told you're not built for the spotlight, you don't need the spotlight. I spent 26 years being underestimated, and I let every single person do it, because their contempt made them careless, and their carelessness made my case. You don't have to raise your voice to be taken seriously. You don't have to explode to be believed. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is smile, fold your napkin, and let them finish digging. Boundaries aren't cruelty, documentation isn't bitterness, and walking away with your dignity intact is its own kind of victory, one no one can take a second time.